Did you know that Max Verstappen was eliminated on the first lap of the Austrian GP, and it could have been the final blow for Red Bull this season? What seemed like just another accident could mark the beginning of the end of an era for the most dominant team in recent years. What do you think? Do you think Red Bull can still save its season, or is it time to look ahead to 2026? I'll read you in the comments. What's going on behind the scenes at Red Bull that not even a favorable penalty could hide? Today I'm going to tell you everything about the 2025 Austrian Grand Prix, Antonelli's penalty, and why this incident could be just the tip of the iceberg for a Red Bull in crisis. At the 2025 Austrian Grand Prix, the tension was palpable from the start. Red Bull arrived at its home race at a critical point in the season, struggling with technical issues and mounting media pressure. All eyes were on Max Verstappen, the team's star driver, who not only represents its greatest competitive hope, but also the visible face of a structure that is beginning to show cracks. Austria was, in theory, the ideal setting for a comeback. The Red Bull Ring, with its fast and technical layout, has historically been favorable to the Austrian team. However, what was supposed to be a redemption race turned into an unexpected disaster from the very first meters. The situation exploded on just the first lap. At turn 3, one of the most critical points on the circuit, Kimi Antonelli, the young Italian talent from Mercedes, locked his rear brakes in a desperate maneuver while trying to avoid another driver. The result was a direct collision with Verstappen's Red Bull, which immediately took him out of the race. In a matter of seconds, Red Bull lost its best player, and the atmosphere in the paddock froze. It wasn't just another accident. It was confirmation that, even when the team is looking to make a comeback, fate seems to be working against it. This incident, beyond the immediate impact on the race standings, left Red Bull even more exposed. The frustration was evident, but so was the resignation. Cameras focused on the engineers with tense faces and the technical team retreating as Verstappen returned to the paddock, visibly shaken. There was no outburst of anger or impulsive statements, just a silence that spoke volumes. The margin for error has been exhausted. Red Bull is not only fighting against its rivals, but also against an internal reality that becomes harder to ignore every day. The news that has caused the most stir following the Austrian Grand Prix is not just Verstappen's retirement, but the FIA's response to what happened. Just hours after the incident, the stewards released their verdict. Mercedes driver Kimi Antonelli would receive a 3-place grid penalty for the next Grand Prix at Silverstone, in addition to 2 penalty points on his superlicense. This decision surprised many in the paddock, especially given the fact that it occurred on the opening lap, a moment that historically receives more lenient treatment from the stewards. But on this occasion, the severity of the error left no room for nuance. The key lies in how the collision occurred. Antonelli, just 18 years old, and in his debut season in Formula One, locked his rear brakes while braking for turn 3 and ended up colliding head-on with Verstappen's Red Bull. The Italian explained that he used his usual braking point and hadn't expected to encounter such slow traffic at that moment, especially with Liam Lawson's car in front of him. But the FIA was emphatic. No other car directly influenced his maneuver, and therefore the error was solely his. It's a serious miscalculation in a category where the margins are minimal and the consequences enormous. What's interesting is that Antonelli took responsibility without hesitation. It's a serious mistake. "I'm very sorry for the team and for Max, of course," he said to the media. That reaction, although dignified and mature, didn't prevent questions from being raised about his readiness to compete at the highest level. Some experts defended him, arguing that such errors are part of the learning process. Others, however, believe that in a team like Mercedes, where every point counts, there's no room for mistakes of that magnitude, especially when they affect a direct contender like Verstappen. This has sparked a new wave of rumors. Is Antonelli ready for this level? Or did Mercedes rush to raise his standard? Aside from speculation about the young driver, the truth is that Antonelli's sanction has generated a divide of opinion among fans and experts. Some believe the FIA is finally being consistent and applying stricter criteria, even in the opening laps. Others, however, believe it is setting a dangerous precedent that could further criminalize racing maneuvers. What no one disputes is that the accident had a huge impact on the outcome of the race, and that Verstappen was the main victim of an unfortunate but avoidable move. Behind the sanction, however, lie more complex tensions. Rumors have been circulating for weeks that there is growing frustration within Red Bull not only with the results, but also with what some perceive as unequal treatment by the authorities. Although the penalty in this case was favorable to them, there are internal voices that insist that if the roles had been reversed, had Verstappen collided with Antonelli, for example, the punishment would have been more severe and highly publicized. This type of commentary fuels the perception that Formula One is not only decided on the track, but also in the back office. Although the penalty imposed on Antonelli was clear and forceful, no one at Red Bull celebrated. They didn't because, deep down, they know the problem goes far beyond a single incident on the track. The collision with Verstappen was simply another blow in a season marked by frustration and shattered expectations. The Austrian team, accustomed to dominating resolutely in recent years, finds itself in a situation few would have imagined at the start of 2025. Technically outclassed, numerically far behind in the championship, and emotionally drained. Max Verstappen, the team's great figurehead, made it clear in his post-race remarks that his approach has changed. There was no anger, no accusations, no furious gestures. On the contrary, he appeared calm, almost philosophical. Nobody does these things on purpose. It can happen, he said of the incident with Antonelli. For many, those words marked a turning point. Not because of what he said, but because of how he said it. Because when a driver as competitive as Max starts speaking in those terms, what he's showing is that he's no longer fighting for the immediate future. He's accepting that this battle, at least the championship, may be lost. Within the team, the signs aren't encouraging either. Helmut Marko, one of Red Bull's technical and strategic masterminds, was very clear. This was a performance that I could say forces us to give up the driver's championship. That phrase isn't common in a structure like Red Bull, which has always avoided showing weakness in the media. That one of its most influential men is talking about the season as if it's practically over reveals just how serious the internal situation is. This isn't just a setback or a bad run, it's a structural crisis that's already affecting the team's mentality. Christian Horner, for his part, has tried to maintain a more measured tone. He said that the focus remains race by race, that there's still the season to go, and that they mustn't lose focus. But even in his statements, the tension is palpable. On more than one occasion, he has avoided committing to a real recovery. Instead of projecting confidence, his words have conveyed a sense of resistance, as if his main objective was to contain the damage rather than reverse the situation. His body language, the silences in press conferences, and his tone of voice are no longer those of a team confident of winning, but rather one trying to avoid a total collapse. Most revealing, however, was a phrase he uttered after the race. He said, "I wish people would stop commenting on my title chances." And that, coming from Verstappen, is a very clear message. It's a way of closing a chapter, of accepting that this season is no longer about winning titles, but about surviving a storm that no one at Red Bull saw coming with this intensity. That statement is not only a reflection of a state of mind, but also a dig at the media environment and the team itself. A way of saying, don't ask me for miracles anymore, because there aren't any. In the short term, the scenario for Red Bull boils down to almost one word: survival. After the disaster in Austria and the tacit confirmation that the 2025 championship is all but lost, the team's focus has quietly but noticeably begun to shift. Statements from Helmut Marko and Christian Horner no longer speak of heroic comebacks or battles until the final race. Instead, everything revolves around assessing what can still be salvaged from this season and, above all, how to prepare for the most significant technical change that Formula One will face in recent years, the 2026 regulations. In this context, the latest updates introduced to the RB21, especially at the Austrian Grand Prix, take on special significance. They are not just technical tweaks to improve immediate performance, but what Marko described as the final push before focusing all resources on the new car for 2026. These improvements included a new floor design, aerodynamic changes to the side pods, and a complete overhaul of the front wing. All of this is aimed at halting the competitive decline against McLaren and Ferrari, who already seem to be operating in a different league. However, even the team itself admits that if these developments don't yield immediate results, on circuits as demanding as Silverstone, there will be no reason to continue wasting energy on a doomed project. The logic prevailing in Milton Keynes is clear. Red Bull will not continue investing in a season where a mathematical recovery is no longer viable and where the gap in terms of technical development with respect to its rivals is too wide. Instead, the team is already drawing up a master plan for 2026, when new regulations will come into force that will completely overhaul the engines, aerodynamic design, and energy recovery systems. This transition is not a surrender, but a strategic move. Furthermore, there is a silent but powerful factor behind the strategy: time. Developing a completely new car requires months of testing, simulations, wind tunnels, and on-track validations. The sooner they start, the greater their advantage over those who continue to spend resources in the 2025 race. Red Bull has already proven in the past that it knows how to capitalize on these types of regulatory transitions. It did so in 2009 with the era of dual diffusers. It did so again in 2022 with the new generation of ground effect cars. Now, with accumulated experience and a coaching staff that, although battered, remains elite, the goal is clear: not to repeat this season's mistakes in the upcoming new cycle. The final image left by the 2025 Austrian Grand Prix is not simply that of an unfortunate accident or a firmly imposed penalty. It goes much deeper. It is a clear picture of a team that, after years of absolute dominance, has lost control of its destiny. Red Bull is not being overtaken for lack of talent or resources. It is being overtaken by the natural evolution of a championship where cycles of success have an expiration date, and where even giants can stumble. The decline has not been abrupt, but it has been constant. And what happened in Austria is, in many ways, the symbolic turning point of that decline. Max Verstappen's reaction, calmly accepting a retirement that in other years would have unleashed his fury, speaks volumes. He is no longer waging a war for the championship. He is navigating within a structure that needs to be fundamentally rethought. The team's body language, the resignation in its management statements, and the evident loss of confidence in technical development are unequivocal signs that this isn't just a bad moment. It's a critical stage that will define the team's immediate future. The truth is that when a team as dominant as Red Bull begins to focus more on 2026 than on the rest of the year, the message is clear: this chapter is already closed. But in Formula One, as in any story of power, defeats also open the door to new possibilities. And this is where you, as a fan of the sport, also play a part in the analysis. Are we witnessing the end of an era, or just a pause in the journey of a team that has already shown what it's capable of when working from the bottom? What comes next will be key. Development for 2026, the strategic decisions made in the next 6 months, and Red Bull's ability to reinvent itself will determine whether this was just a stumble or the beginning of a prolonged decline. And now I want to know what you think. Do you think Verstappen should continue to rely on Red Bull during this transition period? Let me know your thoughts in the comments.